Nobody saw this coming. A billionaire president just tried to legally destroy a late-night comedian. He sent the most expensive lawyers in Washington straight to ABC's front door. He expected silence, compliance, and a televised apology. He expected Jimmy Kimmel to fold like every other person he had ever legally threatened. He expected the corporate executives at Disney to panic and pull the plug. He expected America to watch a comedian get humiliated on his own stage. He was wrong. Dead wrong. And what happened next on live television that night became the single most powerful moment in late-night history. To understand why this moment hit so hard, you first need to understand the weeks of tension that had been quietly building behind the scenes. Jimmy Kimmel had not been pulling his punches. Night after night, he was delivering monologues that went far beyond simple jokes. He was surgically dissecting the contradictions, the broken promises, and the outright deceptions being fed to the American public. He wasn't reading from a comedy writer's room script. He was doing what the best late-night hosts have always done, using humor as a scalpel to cut through the noise and expose what powerful people desperately want hidden. Trump was watching. Trump is always watching. And with every monologue, every clip that went viral, every audience that howled with laughter at his expense, the fury inside the White House was building to a boiling point. For a man who has spent decades constructing an image of untouchable strength, the idea of millions of Americans laughing at him every single night was not just annoying, it was existential. So Trump did what Trump always does when someone refuses to bow down. He called the lawyers. Not one lawyer. Not a small firm. He unleashed a full team of the most expensive, most aggressive legal minds that unlimited political money could buy. These were not people who sent polite letters. These were legal attack dogs trained to make problems disappear through sheer intimidation and financial terror. The cease and desist letter they produced was a masterpiece of legal bullying. It arrived on thick cream-colored law firm stationery with enough legal jargon to fill a law school textbook. The demands were breathtaking in their arrogance. Kimmel must immediately stop all jokes referencing Donald Trump. Kimmel must deliver a formal public apology on air, and if he refused, the network would face a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit that would drag ABC through years of catastrophically expensive litigation. In any normal situation, that letter would have worked. Corporate media is terrified of litigation. Network executives do not become network executives by being brave. They become network executives by protecting the bottom line. Trump and his legal team had run this play before, and it had worked before. The calculation was simple and coldly logical. No television network would risk hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees just to protect one comedian's right to make jokes. But there was one thing Trump's legal team had not properly accounted for. Jimmy Kimmel is not a normal television personality. He is a man who grew up in a working-class family who clawed his way to the top of late-night television, not through connections or corporate favor, but through raw talent and a spine made of solid steel. When that letter landed on his desk, he did not call his own lawyers first. He did not call the Disney executives in a panic. He picked up the letter, read every single word, and then made a decision that would define his career forever. The night of the broadcast, the studio audience filed in expecting the usual warm, entertaining show they always got. The warm-up comedian did his job. The band played. The lights came up. But the moment Kimmel walked through those curtains, something was different. The audience felt it immediately, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm hits. His walk was slower. His expression was not the loose, grinning face of a man about to tell jokes. He looked like a man carrying something heavy and important. A man who had made a serious decision and was absolutely at peace with the consequences. He walked directly to center stage and stopped. He did not go to his desk. He did not wave at the audience. He stood completely still and held up a thick stack of papers so that the studio cameras could capture every detail of the imposing legal letterhead printed across the top. The audience went quiet in a way that studio audiences almost never go quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a punchline, but the electric, silent quiet of people who suddenly understand they are witnessing something real. Kimmel began to read the letter out loud. Not dramatically, not mockingly, just clearly and directly. Every word exactly as the lawyers had written it. He read the claims that his jokes were causing serious reputational damage to a former president. He read the demand that he cease all commentary immediately. He read the part about the public apology. And as each sentence landed in that silent studio, something remarkable began to happen. The audience started to laugh. Not the explosive laugh of a great punchline, but the slow, incredulous laugh of people hearing something so absurd, so nakedly revealing that the comedy writes itself. Because here is what those expensive lawyers had never considered. By putting their demands in writing, they had created a document that exposed everything. Every word of that letter screamed the same desperate message. This powerful man is terrified of a comedian. This billionaire with the nuclear codes and an army of advisors is so fragile, so thin-skinned, so fundamentally insecure that a late-night monologue keeps him awake at night. The letter wasn't a legal threat. It was an accidental confession. Then Kimmel lowered the papers and the laughter died. What he said next silenced the room completely. He looked directly into the main camera, not at the audience, but into the lens. And his voice shifted into something quieter and more serious than anyone had ever heard from him before. He talked about what this letter actually represented beneath all the legal language. He explained that this was not about protecting a reputation. He said this was about testing whether money and legal terror could successfully silence free speech in America. He reminded every person watching that the First Amendment does not exist to protect comfortable speech. It exists precisely to protect speech that makes powerful people uncomfortable. The studio was absolutely motionless. This was no longer a comedy show. This was a civics lesson delivered by a man putting his entire livelihood on the line for a principle. People in that audience later described feeling something they had not expected to feel sitting in a television studio. They felt the weight of something genuinely important happening right in front of them. Then Kimmel looked down at the stack of legal papers in his hands one final time. He paused. The pause lasted just long enough for everyone watching, in the studio and at home, to understand that what was about to happen was completely deliberate and completely irreversible. He looked back up at the camera. He said 4 words. "Here is my response." And then with both hands, he gripped that thick, expensive stack of legal paper and tore it cleanly and completely in half. The sound of that paper tearing cut through the silence like a thunderclap. He tore it again. And then he opened his hands and let every shredded piece flutter down to the studio floor. For one single frozen second, the entire room held its breath watching those torn fragments of legal intimidation drift downward like confetti. And then the audience absolutely lost their minds. What happened in that studio in the next 60 seconds was not a normal audience reaction. This was not the applause that follows a good joke or even a great monologue. People were on their feet instantly. The cheering was the kind that starts in your chest before it reaches your hands. Raw and involuntary and deeply emotional. People were shouting. Some people were crying. Because they were not cheering for a talk show host. They were cheering for something they had been waiting a very long time to see. Someone refusing to flinch. Someone looking directly at a bully and saying no. Not quietly, not politely, publicly, permanently, on camera, for the entire country to witness. The clip hit social media before the show even ended. By midnight, it had millions of views. By morning, it was the lead story on every major news network. Legal analysts pointed out the delicious irony that Trump's legal threat had spectacularly backfired. If he actually pursued the lawsuit, he would face legal discovery under oath, which would expose far more than any Kimmel monologue ever could. The bluff had been called on national television in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. But beyond the viral moment, beyond the legal analysis, beyond the television ratings, there was something deeper happening that America needed to see. Because bullies depend on one thing above everything else, the belief that their target will eventually break. Every cease and desist letter, every legal threat, every furious social media post aimed at silencing a critic is built on the same foundation. The foundation is fear. And the moment one person refuses to be afraid, the moment one person tears that foundation in half and lets it fall to the floor, the entire structure collapses. Jimmy Kimmel did not just defend his own right to make jokes that night. He reminded every journalist, every comedian, every ordinary American citizen that the First Amendment is not a suggestion. It is not a privilege that exists only until a powerful man gets angry enough to send lawyers. It is the bedrock of everything this country claims to stand for. And it only survives when people are willing to stand in front of a camera, hold up a threatening letter, and tear it apart with their bare hands. Trump never filed the lawsuit. The legal threats quietly disappeared the way all bluffs disappear when someone refuses to fold. But the image of those shredded papers falling to that studio floor did not disappear. It became something permanent, a symbol of what courage looks like when it stops being theoretical and becomes real. Not the courage of a battlefield, not the courage of a historic speech. The everyday human courage of a man who received a threat, looked it directly in the face, and said simply, clearly and publicly, "No. You do not get to silence me. You do not get to bully this country into forgetting what freedom actually means." And the audience erupted, because deep down, every single one of them had been waiting for exactly that moment. And Jimmy Kimmel gave it to them live on television for the entire world to see.